Would you have bought this little table for $5? Keep watching and I'll show you why it was, or maybe it was not worth it. As I was leaving a thrift store, I just happened to pass by this other little thrift store that I had never seen before, and they had some of their furniture outside, so another piece actually caught my eye, so I whipped around, pulled in, and then I saw this little guy. It didn't have a price on it, so I carried it inside, and the girl at the register said it had just been dropped off, and she said, "I don't know, how about $5? And I said, "Sold." I love an old parquet floor, so why not a similar style tabletop? It was pretty stained and a little wobbly, so we did have to do a few repairs. But it was nothing a little wood glue and some clamps couldn't fix. So once that was dry, then I took my deglossing wipes and cleaned the whole thing down, and then started sanding to see what it looked like under those stains. I used my orbital sander on this one with a few different grits, starting with the lower number, the more coarse grit, and working my way up to 220. I knew I wanted to add a little more character by staining on a design of some sort, so I cut out all these little cardboard pieces. I'm such a visual person, I have to see it beforehand. So I laid them out a few different ways and put it to a Facebook vote, and this last one is the one that won. After sanding, I wiped it down again and then got to staining on the design. And I really did not want to have to tape off all of these little squares, so I decided to just try it by hand with this small little angled brush and see if the stain would bleed over into the squares next to it or not. And a few of them did, but luckily I was just able to use my tiny little detail sander that I just used by hand just to get off any stain that bled over. I use these small little paintbrushes in all shapes and sizes for so many different things. They're really handy, and you can get them anywhere, dollar store, Walmart. They don't have to be fancy, but it's definitely a good thing to have on hand. I let that stain dry overnight and then came back the next day and put on a second coat. Then I waited a couple days just to make sure that was really good and dry before I put on my top coat. And I wasn't sure if I could use the water-based top coat over the oil-based stain, but the Google machine said yes, so I went for it. I was afraid this might happen, but once I put the top coat on and let it dry, all of the lighter colored squares stayed a little bit darker, so then it was a little too close to the color of the squares that I put the stain on. So I then did another coat of the darker color and wasn't sure how that would work since I had already put a top coat on it, but it did make them darker. So once that was all completely dry, then I did one more top coat. I had to fill in a few little spots on the legs with wood filler whenever we were doing the repairs, so I just made sure I got those sanded smooth, wiped it all down again, and then I used Heirloom Traditions paint. It's their all-in-one paint in the color Iron Gate, which is a nice soft black color. I really like the contrast of that with wood tones, so I was excited to see how this would turn out. One reason I really love this paint is that it truly is all in one. You don't have to prime, you don't have to top coat, even though I do sometimes, just depending on the piece, but and you don't have to sand a lot. Like, you know, if you have some little repairs or some little areas that aren't smooth, or the prior finish is chipping or peeling, you want to give that a little sand, but it's very minor and you can do it by hand most times without an actual sander if you just want to grab some sandpaper. So that's a big advantage. And I also really like the finish because it's not quite matte, but it's just a notch above that without being too glossy. If you do like a glossier finish, you can always add top coat to it, so it just gives you a lot of options. This paint also works really well with a sprayer. You can see in some of my other videos me using it in a sprayer, and I just water it down just a little bit and it works really well. It gives a really nice smooth finish. The first coat usually dries pretty quickly, just depending on humidity and temperatures, but usually after an hour or so you can go back in with the second coat. So I did 2 full coats and then some touch-ups. So here it is. I gave this unique little side table a little more uniqueness with the design on top. So let me know in the comments what you think. Was it worth $5? Thanks for watching and see you next time.